361 days to returning the 5th District to the people of Oklahoma. Hi, welcome to Patriot Studios. I'm David Green, and this is the Green for Congress channel. In Part 1, I told you about bringing Congress home. In Part 2, we talked about shackling the deep state. Now in Part 3, term limits. Let's get started. Term limits are very popular among we the people. There's nothing new about them. They've been around a long time. The problem is, professional politicians have no greater fear. So to get term limits passed is going to take a populist movement. Today, in our time together, I want to talk about the arguments for and against term limits and why we need to move forward with them. The Brookings Institute, a George Soros-funded think tank, published 5 reasons not to enact term limits. Let's take a look. Number 1, take power away from the voter. This is true. Preventing a person from being on the ballot is a dilution of voter choice. However, we already have restrictions on things like age and residency. Since we are diluting the voter's choice, how much are we diluting it, and is the dilution worth the cost? According to the 2010 census, there is an average population of 710,767 people per congressional district, which would mean every time a person is restricted from running due to term limits, we have reduced the people's choice by 1/1000th of 1%. Since term limits will increase competition for congressional seats, this loss of choice, I think, will actually spur a greater interest in individuals running and increase the voters' choices overall. So I don't find this argument to be a valid reason not to enact term limits. Number 2, severely decrease congressional capacity. This is a straw man argument based on a false paradigm. The paradigm that only certain individuals can understand and enact reasonable public policy is simply false. Everyone is capable of presenting public policy. The fact that in the House it takes a minimum of 218 votes to pass a piece of legislation is in of itself a safeguard from any decrease of congressional capacity, much less a severe one. It is Einstein that is credited with saying that to do the same thing over again and expect different results is the definition of insanity. To continue to send the same professional politicians to Congress and expect any different public policy would be insane. Any loss of congressional capacity would pale in comparison to the gain of new and fresh views on public policy brought about by term limits. So I don't find this argument to be valid at its foundation. Number 3, limit incentives for gaining policy expertise. I find it absolutely laughable that they say term limits would impose a tremendous brain drain on the institution. This is a glaring illumination of the socialist mindset, the mindset that only the chosen few of government elites have the ability to express expertise in policy. With that mindset, Albert Einstein would have never been a scientist. A big difference in the view of a free society is that individuals with an expertise will step away from their private life for a period of time and serve in public office. These individuals have already developed the expertise in given areas that will benefit the country greatly. But if they have to run against incumbents always, it is unlikely they will. Thus, term limits will actually increase policy expertise. I find this argument insulting to the American people that only the elites are fit to form public policy. Number 4, automatically kick out effective lawmakers. Again, another false paradigm. This is presented from the socialist point of view that government is the solution, which is not the case. The great American experiment has been to see if people can be self-governing and effectively run a socio-economic system without the heavy hand of government. And the answer has been a resounding, yes, we can. Yes, term limits will kick out effective lawmakers. But just because a lawmaker is effective at getting legislation passed does not necessarily mean they are getting good legislation passed. Look no further than Obamacare for that evidence. One of the worst pieces of legislation ever, but was passed by 2 effective congressional leaders. It is too bad we didn't have term limits then. Maybe we wouldn't be dealing with the fallout of such horrible legislation. So just because a lawmaker is effective does not necessarily make them good for the country. Conversely, it will also automatically kick out ineffective lawmakers. Lawmakers who know how to campaign but are not effective in the halls of Congress. The fact that we would have greater turnover would increase competition during elections and result in better, not worse legislators running for Congress. So I find this argument to be irrelevant for the consideration of term limits. Number 5, do little to minimize corruptive behavior or slow the revolving door. As long as the members of Congress live in the swamp, they are going to be vulnerable to the forces of the swamp. The less time they are in the swamp, the less time they are exposed to the influence that could corrupt them. This is why we need to bring Congress home. The less exposure to the deep state and lobbyist cash, the less likely the legislator themselves will fall to the corruption. By the way, if this statement is correct, minimize corruptive behavior, my question would be, if corruption exists and is known to exist among members of Congress, why is it not being prosecuted? All right, that was 5 major reasons from the Brookings Institute to not enact term limits. So now let's take a look at the reasons to enact term limits from the Heritage Foundation. Number 1, term limits counterbalance the incumbent advantage. I don't know that I agree with that. If you have an incumbent in the race, they are going to have an advantage. But with term limits, there will be more races without an incumbent in the race. With only a 10% turnover rate in the House, term limits will help end that stagnation and oust the professional politicians. Number 2, term limits secure Congress' independent judgment. While congressional oversight is an implied function of Congress, it is a widely held one. Independent judgment is crucial to keeping collusion from forming and undermining the checks and balances of the oversight function. The shorter the term of a legislator, the less long-term collusion can be established. In other words, it would be of little benefit for any agency or lobbyist to wine and dine Congress members if they're only there for a short time. Number 3, term limits are a reality check. Knowing that you will have to return to private life and live by the rules and laws that you have made will make the legislator take pause, if even briefly, to consider the personal consequences when they return to life beyond the swamp. Number 4, term limits minimize members for re-election related pork barrel legislation. I grew up in West Virginia, where the longest-serving politician, Robert Byrd, was from. He was the master of the pork barrel. So I've seen this firsthand. I'm not sure that term limits will make a great decrease in pork barrel legislation, but I think it will slow it down and decrease the value of it overall. Number 5, term limits will restore respect for Congress. Maybe, but the number one thing that will return respect for Congress is a member serving the people instead of corporations, unions, and other special interests. The one and most important reason for passing term limits is you. You want it, and you want it in massive numbers. Over 60% of all major groups want term limits passed. Republicans, Democrats, Asians, blacks, Hispanics, natives, whites, old, young, and everybody in between wants term limits. Everyone except the professional politicians, unions, and special interest groups. So let's get it done. Our government is of the people, by the people, and for the people, and you want term limits. I will co-sponsor and support and vote for term limits. I will self-impose term limits. Join my Keep America Free campaign. I will fight and defeat Kendra Horn and return the 5th District to the will of the people. From Patriot Headquarters, this is David Green. We have a lot to do and only a year to get it done. So let's get busy.